Yeah, I imagine the years of testing. There were some days it's like that's all you did was try beer.
Yeah. That's what we told our wives. Exactly.
Hey,
Yeah, totally.
as long as everyone's sleeping at night, it's all good.
Yeah.
Right?
So with the show, we like to keep mics about a fist length. Obviously, you can kind of move those however you want, whatever's comfortable. And then once we're done, Tim and I, later this week or weekend, will attach like an intro to it. We just kind of intro you guys, the episode. We'll type up show notes, kind of link everything, website, all that stuff. And then we'll send it to you guys for final approval. So you can take a listen to it, read through the notes, let us know if any corrections need to be made, any edits in the audio. We want to make sure that you guys are quoted as you want to be. So
Awesome.
other than that, anything goes. You can swear. You can do whatever.
Fuck yeah.
That's usually one of the early questions. Like, can we swear?
Yes.
Is that okay?
Oh yeah, we've had some people on here that let it loose, and one guy was describing a party that he hosted, like in college, and we're like, all right, well, Mom, skip that one. But
Warning, graphic.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So when we post on like YouTube or iTunes, we have to put like mature audience. There's an age restriction, like made for kids. Definitely not. So.
Well, we're talking alcohol, so it's already going to be age restricted. So.
Yeah, fair. So for our listeners, maybe that don't know you guys, I know anyone who's local, a little further outside of that, know of Sun King. Maybe we can just intro each of you and give us a quick background, who you are, and then kind of talk us how we got here.
Hi, my name's Dave Colt. I'm a co-founder of Sun King Brewing Company. And what are we co-CEOs?
Yeah.
And the reason why we're co-CEOs is because neither one of us wanted the job, so we decided to split it. I guess I started drinking beer way back when I was about 5 years old.
Okay.
I was hanging out at a family event, and all of these men had these cans of things, and they were enjoying the crap out of it. Some magical thing happened on the television box, and they walked toward it, but left their cans of magical juice hanging out. So I went, what's this deliciousness all about? I took a sip, and I went, yum. So I'm one of the rare people like this guy who, and I'm pointing to my co-partner and co-founder, Clay.
Hey everybody, I'm Clay Robinson, co-founder, co-CEO, co-owner, co-creator of Sun King Brewing Company in Indianapolis, Indiana. I fell in love with beer around the same age, probably about 4 or 5.
Young. Good for you guys.
My grandpa drank Michelob, so the little stubby bottles with the gold foil on it. So it was gold foil is like, and he would sit it on the table next to his chair, and I would get in trouble by my mom because I would like sneak around the chair and sip on his beer. So I don't know why, but I loved it. And then obviously in college I drank a lot of not so great beer, cheap beer, swilly beer, whatever you could get, 30 racks that were on sale. But I worked in an English pub that had a dozen beers on draft, and then 50 or so at the time. I believe we called them microbrews, microbrews from around. So I would just I would get an opportunity to just drink these different beers. And so later in life, when I discovered that beer was more than just that 30 rack of fizzy yellow liquid, it was mind blowing. So
that's awesome.
And how did you guys meet?
Oh, this just segues directly into it. So
there you go.
He brought himself all the way up to college, and then after college, I went to Hanover College, and he went to Wabash. I moved to Indianapolis, and started my bartending career, and just trying to figure out what next steps were and all that kind of good stuff. A guy that was a general manager of the place that I was working at went to start up a brew pub, and I went, damn, I've always liked beer ever since I was a little kid, so I'd like to kind of go check that out. And could you introduce me to who the brewer is? Because I've always, been fascinated about how it's made. So fast forward about a year or so into that, I'm the assistant brewer there, and also, doing some bartending and other things. And in walks this hippie MFer with hair, down his back and a beard down, partway to his navel. So.
Yeah, so when I got out of college, I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. I took my first job washing dishes at Roscoe's Tacos on the south side in Greenwood. So, and then I ended up working there for a couple of years.
His parents were really proud.
They were very, 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 very proud. For
Give
sure.
you the whole what we paid for college. You got a degree to do that whole bit. Yeah.
I actually came home one day, and after college, I had saved money, and for college I asked for money from people. So I went to Europe for a couple months and traveled, and I came home. By the time I came home, I was broke, trying to figure out what I was going to do, and I had gone to a show at the Vogue, and with a hangover went to grab some burritos with some friends, and it was the first time I'd ever eaten at Roscoe's. I lived in Greenwood, and there was a sign on the door that said "Help Wanted," and I was like, looks like, and like the music was all like Grateful Dead, Widespread Panic, Fish.
Okay,
it was all hip music, and I was like, well, that's pretty all right. And everybody working there was was long haired as well, and I was like, sign says you're hiring. Like, what do you pay? And Roscoe said, I don't know. What are you worth? And I said, well, I'm worth a lot, but I need a job. So I filled out an application, and he's like, yeah, well, you can start washing dishes next week. And I was like, okay, great. Like, I didn't care. I just wanted a job. So I told my mom, and I was like, yeah, I got a job. My parents were like, really, where? And I go, Roscoe's Tacos. And the joy went straight from her face. She was like, what?
That's when you hit her with the employee discount number, though.
Yeah.
But Mom, look,
50% off.
You're saving a ton on groceries. So,
and I get a shift meal.
But yeah, so they were kind of like, well, you just graduated from Wabash College and you took a job at Roscoe's Tacos. What are you going to be doing? I was like, washing dishes.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh my god, oh no. I'm like, it's fine. Like, I need a job. I don't really care. I'm not too proud to do anything, which I think it's a good work motto in general. Like, so many people are like, I would never do that. I'm like, if I had to, I'd go wash dishes tomorrow because that's what gets it done. When we opened our Carmel location, it was so busy the first 3 days that all I did was wash pint glasses. Yeah. So that we could keep service
on the
going.
Job training at Roscoe's.
Yes.
Yeah.
Going all the way back. But anyway, so I loved beer. The job I had in college made me love craft beer, and I had some friends who had homebrewed, and I wanted to have decent beer. I would go to concerts. I drove a '85 Volkswagen camper van, and I'd go to shows at Deer Creek, and I would have parties at my house. But whenever I would want to take beer. So for parties, I found Circle V, and they were the only brewer pub in town that actually sold kegs, because kegs are kind of a pain in the butt for small breweries because they cost $100 and some just for the shell, and then you loan it out to somebody full of beer, and they don't really care to bring it back for 6 months or a year. We've actually had kegs returned to us that people are like, I've had this in my garage for 7 years. You're like,
we're moving, and my wife is forcing me to bring it back to you.
Yeah, totally. Just thank you. Covered in dust and dirt. So
big receivables numbers.
Pretty commonly, kegs just go away and often don't come back. So it's particularly at the time, nobody sold kegs. So Circle V did. So I went in and I tried some beers and had a beer and filled out the paperwork and talked to the guy behind the bar who was the bar manager. It was
me.
Yeah, that was Dave. And so anyway, I'd buy kegs for parties, and then I would also take kegs in the back of my van to shows at Deer Creek, and I would vend $5 pints out of my van in the parking lot.
That's cool.
Bootlegging beer to help pay for my rock and roll habit. And I did that for a few years, and then in 1999, I'd been at Roscoe's for a couple of years, and I wasn't quite making enough money. And I realized I wanted to do a little bit more, so I decided I want to go back to waiting tables. And I tried to get jobs, but every job interview I would have, inevitably the manager of whatever restaurant it was would be like, you seem really great. Really like you. Would love to hire you. Just got one problem. We have a no facial hair policy. So if you want to work here, late '90s beards were not in vogue at the time.
Not cool. Yeah.
They're like, we have a no facial hair policy, so you'd need to shave if you want to work here. And I would inevitably be like, yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate your time, but I'm not interested. And just straight walk out the door. So
love it.
So I was having trouble finding a second job waiting tables, and a friend of mine had a friend who worked at Rock Bottom, and he had long hair and a beard. And she said, hey, my friend Brian works at Rock Bottom. He's got long hair and a beard, so I know they hire hippies, so you should go work there. So I did. So I edged my way in. I knew some folks who worked there. I went through all the interview process. I started working. I almost didn't get the job because for my first interview, they told me to go wait at the bar, and when I sat at the bar, the bartender asked if I wanted something, and I said, of course, and I ordered a pint of oatmeal stout. So
what do you expect?
Yeah, exactly.
At a bar, you're going to ask for a water? Come on.
It was a brewery. It was a brewery. Yeah. And anyway, the general manager is still a friend to this day, and he owned McNiven's on Mass Ave, and now owns one of a spot down in the Garage Food Hall. But Stuart didn't want to hire me because I had the balls to order a beer. Actually, I think more the audacity to. And I ended up being their brewer. It all worked out. And but the first the week that we did training at Rock Bottom, the guy who was the brewer, a guy named Tom, was kind of an interim brewer, and we did a brewery tour, and it was the first time in my life that I realized that brewing job was a thing that you could do. Like, I knew beer was brewed and I knew people home brewed, but like the actual ability to walk through a brewery, and I mean, I'd been to Circle V buying kegs. I knew they had a brewery. I knew it got done. I just didn't realize. And so it was like this light bulb moment of like, oh my God, like this is a job like somebody like I could do. Like I could make beer for a living. So I started asking a lot of questions of the brewers after my shifts and just being really curious about it. And a few months into it, Tom was getting transferred out. A new guy was coming in. He's like, hey, new guy's coming in. Me, I'm going wherever. Jackson, the assistant's going to Colorado. So there's going to be an opening coming up. Bill will be here in a few weeks, and I'd like to introduce you to him because you ask a lot of good questions. You've got a really great work ethic, and you got a good head on your shoulders, and I think you'd be a great brewer. And I'm like, oh my God, seriously?
Wow.
What? Wow, like
That's
really?
awesome.
And that was kind of the thing that like turned the corner for it, and was like, wow, this is a job that I could do.
Totally.
That's awesome.
So Circle V, all of that happening, it eventually kind of wound down and went out of business. So in the interim, between that and meeting back up with Clay, I worked for a beer distributor. So I kind of got some for about a year or so to get, you know, that other side of the fence and how it gets out there into the public and displays and all that kind of good stuff. So there's a newspaper article about a new brew pub opening up downtown. It's called Circle V Brewing, or not Circle V, the Ram. Pardon me. Called the Ram. And I, you know, called back then, you know, the internet wasn't such a big, robust thing where you could get all kinds of good information. So if you call the library, even to this day, they will do research on your behalf. And so I said, who is this company? Where are they from? Is there phone numbers? And they got me the phone number for the master brewer for this company. And then I called the guy, and he didn't return my call. So the next day I called, and he didn't return my call. So the next day I called, and he didn't return my call. For 2 weeks, kept calling every single day, and finally the phone rings, and he's like, all right, man, I got it. You want to interview for this job. We're going to be in town next week. Here's the times that I'm available. So I got the job.
That's awesome.
As the assistant brewer, and our good friend John, later finding out, you know, well, this is fast forwarding slightly.
Yeah. So I was brewing at the Rock Bottom, a guy named Bill Smith, who he basically, like, when he got there, he grew up in Indianapolis. He went to North Central. He left Indy and went to Colorado, started brewing in Colorado at a little brew pub, and then ended up with the Rock Bottom Brewery in Denver. And basically, like, our first meeting for our job interview and hangout was like, well, Tom says you're a good guy and got a good head on your shoulders. Let's go have some beers and see if we get along.
So, you know, that's an interview.
That was my interview. So it was great. So we went to the Broad Ripple Brew Pub, and we played. We drank some beers, and then we went somewhere else nearby and played pool. And we spent an afternoon together, and then we went by Great Fermentations, and he bought me a couple of like the Joy of Home Brewing and a couple books when it was actually here on 82nd Street. And and so we basically just spent an afternoon hanging out. He's like, Tom, highly recommend you. I think we'd get along. Like, how about you start next week? I'm like, oh, great. So, you know, during this whole kind of time and conversation, he's like, look, I just moved in from Colorado. I took this job because it gave me an opportunity to run my own brewery, but I grew up here and I want to be west, so I have to be here for a year before I can transfer out. And if you can work as hard as you can, learn as much as you can, and bust your ass, when I get an opportunity to transfer out, I will recommend you for my job. And I was like, okay, well, that sounds fantastic. So I started working with Bill. I was trying to learn as much as I could, reading every book or magazine, different things that I could, and really immersing myself in it, and fell completely in love with it. And during that first year, the Ram opened up down the street, and he said, hey, you know, we should go say hey to the new guys down the street, because brewing in general, very congenial industry. I mean, back in the late 90s, I think that Dave and I, there were probably 12 breweries in the state, and we probably knew all 16 people that worked at all 12 breweries. So not a lot of us. And so we went down, we took a couple of growlers. They were under construction. We kind of worked our way in and back to the brewery, and there were a couple guys, and we're like, hey, you know, Bill and Clay from the Rock Bottom, how's it going? And we met John and Dave, and we're talking for a minute, and we just kind of had that I know you kind of feeling, and it's like, Volkswagen van, Circle V, like, oh, hey, man, how are you? Like,
Right
wow.
on.
Yeah, we've known each other for a few years now. So
Yeah.
that just kind of led to that easy, like, oh, shit, man, we go way back. And now we actually do the same job just like 2 blocks away from each other. And there were 3 brew pubs downtown. And again, we knew everybody at all 3 of those. And so we'd go to each other's beer tappings and pop to one another's place on a Friday after work for beer, or, you know, just kind of hang out and get to know each other. Started talking about life and music and all of the other various things that we had in common. So we just became friends over that period of time. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So when you guys met then, from there, how did it transpire to, hey, we can do this a little differently, a little better, we can run our own shop?
That took years.
That did take years.
Yeah.
So while it feels like, you know, maybe we burst onto the scene and an overnight success, Clay ended up becoming the head brewer, as was, you know.
Yeah, a little over a year later, Bill got an opportunity to transfer to Seattle. I did my interview with the director of brewing operations, and he said, "You're totally underqualified, but I think you can do this job.
Yeah.
So congratulations." I was like, "Okay, great."
Love it when a plan comes together.
Totally.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, that was a totally absurd plan. I went from
Yeah.
never brewing a batch of beer in my life to running my own brewery in like 16 months.
That's
So
awesome.
the guy that was the head brewer at the Ram was from Seattle, and he missed the mountains. So he actually talked to Clay, and Clay got him a job with Rock Bottom in Colorado, so he could see some mountains again, which then allowed me to move up to be the head brewer at the Ram.
Okay.
So that is the
However-
source of the conflict and
Yes.
how we got together.
Yeah, however, a lot of what we have built and created at Sun King is a direct response to the other jobs and life experiences we've had that we did not enjoy.
Okay.
So at Rock Bottom, they had a $1,000 bonus if you, as a manager, which brewers were considered managers. We went to management meetings, we trained staff, we were involved in all of the day-to-day operations of the business, and they actually offered me a position in Colorado. And at the time, I was kind of struggling. I wasn't sure. I mean, I loved what I did. Rock Bottom at the time was kind of grooming. There were some corporate culture changes going on. They were grooming for what eventually became a sale to a private equity company, just general business stuff. My dad is an entrepreneur, and he'll get in the story a little bit later, but I'd seen this type of thing growing up from companies, and so I wasn't super happy, and I wasn't sure if I went to Colorado that I would still be happy, even though I thought going to Colorado would be like would be a great thing for me. My sister lives in Colorado, and I was like, okay, no, I'm not going to do it because I'm not really sure where I'm at with this right now. So I do know a really great brewer down the street who wants to move west. So I introduced John. I basically much like when like Dave's been very good with me at different times, and like later when I started working with him at the Ram, he kind of like basically just paved the way for me. So I paved the way for John to get this job at Rock Bottom, which he left, gave Dave an opportunity to move up, and I was like, oh hey, there's a management signing bonus, so I just hired a manager for you guys, and so like $1,000, man.
Yeah.
Where's my $1,000? And my GM's like, oh, that's a good point. I never thought about that. And like, it was for restaurant managers, which half the time the restaurant manager would be there for 6 months and move on to another job. Brewers tend to stay put for longer, especially in that era. Anyway, so he's like, let me ask about it. So he runs it up the food chain of the middle management and other things, and comes back. He's like, yeah, so brewers aren't technically considered managers, and you're not going to get your bonus. And I'm a principled individual in general.
Right.
And I literally
Do not cross this one.
yeah. I learned spite from my mother. Thanks, Judy. But it was literally, I was like, you got to be fucking kidding me. And he's like, no. And I'm like, how the fuck am I not a manager? I go to fucking management meetings every fucking Wednesday. You know, I train our staff. I do this. I'm responsible for an entire cost center that I have to keep in line. Like, I'm as much of a manager as anybody. And I got to tell you, I think that's complete bullshit.
Yeah.
And he's like, I get it. I'm really sorry. Like, I'll see what I can do. I'll talk to some more people, see if there's any changes. And at that point in time, like, that just shut me down. I was like, you know what?
Dang.
That's fucking bullshit. Like, I went from like working from a company that, while it was a bigger corporation, it was based in Colorado, I felt like they really cared about me, to like, wow, really? Like $1,000? What is $1,000 to you? Like $1,000 to me at actually like 27 years old, and you know, was a lot. I'm like, man, it's $1,000. What can I do with that? So anyway, but more than anything, it was the principle, and I was like, you know what?
Yeah.
So it made me really upset, and I I mulled over it for a while, and I probably drank way too much and had a little bit too much fun, and was like, what am I doing here? Like, these people don't care about me, and I'm not sure what I'm even doing with my life. And so at 27 years old, I decided that I would quit my job and do whatever. I didn't know what it was. I basically, actually, it was in the summer, and I gave them 6 months notice, and I was like, hey, so just so you know, end of the year comes, I'm leaving and I'm never coming back. They're like, you're giving us 6 months notice? I'm like, I know it takes a long time. Like, there's not a lot of brewers. You got to find a replacement for me. I'll work through the end of the year. I'm not like terribly upset. Like, I still enjoy my job. You violated my principles, and I can't in good conscience continue to work for you. It's like, man, really sorry. And like, no problem. Just like find somebody to come in. I'll help train them, and then I'll transition out. And so I did that, and they were working on finding somebody. And then the guy who denied my bonus came to town one day and was like, hey, can we talk for a minute? I'm like, yeah. He goes, so we've been talking a lot about this situation. And,
over $1,000.
Yep. It's like, we've been talking a lot about this situation. I just wanted to let you know that we're going to give you that bonus. And I was like, thanks a lot. That's great. He's like, so are you willing to stay? And I was like, no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Not at all. He's like, but you got your bonus. I'm like,
that wasn't the deal.
No, you don't.
You did your part of the deal for the bonus. Deal's over.
Yeah, you don't understand here. So anyway, I trained who became a really good friend, Tim Marshall, who's still a friend to this day, to take over my gig. And I walked out the door at the end of the year, and this was like 2003, and I was going to take 6 months off work and just kind of clear my head and figure out what was going on and what I might want to do with my life. I loved brewing, but I didn't love the company I worked for. I really wasn't sure. I had to roll over a 401k that had a very robust matching program, and I had very limited bills, so I plugged a bunch of money into my retirement, and that bunch of money was a giant pot of money, and I was 27 years old, and I was like, well, I may never live to retire, so forget about it, 401k. I'm rolling you over into my checking account. And so basically 6 months turned into 3 years. Okay. I did some part-time construction and remodeling, and I traveled around the country and slept on friends and family's couches, and I read books, and I spent a bunch of time in Colorado with my sister, and I basically pretty much just fucked off and chased rock and roll music for 3 years and had a really fun time. Lo and behold, like, it wasn't a very big 401k, and it wasn't enough money to retire, so I was kidding myself. But lo and behold, I woke up at 30 years old, and I was not only broke because I'd spent my entire 401k, but I wasn't so great with money at the time, and I racked up some credit card debt. So I was in debt. I was 30 years old, and I had no idea what I was going to do with my life, and I was like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Wow. Maybe I made some poor life decisions, and I was really trying to figure it out, and
ring, ring.
The phone rang.
Yeah.
It was me. So I was actually calling Clay. The Ram was expanding and adding a satellite store that needed more beer for, but not a brewery per se. So I was in need of somebody to help me out there, and so I called Clay up.
He wasn't calling to ask me for a job, by the way.
I was not. I was calling for a friend, Dustin Boyer, who actually left us and started Duke's Honky Tonk on the south side, R.I.P.D. So I said, hey, can I have Dee's number?
I was like, why do you want Dee's number? He was like, well, because Dustin had been my assistant brewer, and I trained him. He's like, well, because Dee's a brewer, and I need somebody who knows how to operate a brewery. And I was like, I know how to operate a brewery. He's like, I thought you quit, like you're done. And I was like, well, I was done, but I'm also broke, and I need to figure out what to do with my life. So
right.
I think I was like, and I was like, plus Dustin was actually opening a bar at the time, Spencer Stadium Tavern. I'm like, Dee's got a gig. He's opening a bar. It's something he's been wanting to do. It's a lifelong dream that he managed to do at least 2 different times in his life. So I was like, he's got a gig. I need a gig. When can I come talk to you? And it was kind of, I think I went that same day. It's like,
you did that evening because I had a tapping party. But I said, dude, you left a company that the culture way better than the D-bags that run this place here at the Ram. So if you hated it there, you are not going to like it here.
And I was like, I don't fucking care, man. I need a job. I got to get my shit figured out. I got to get it back on track. And like, I love brewing, and I miss that. And more than anything, I need a job, and I like you. So, and he's like, okay. So basically, like I said, he was like, okay, here's the deal. Here's who you're going to have to talk to. Here's what you're going to need to say. He negotiated my salary. He basically like took care of everything. And then I had a few different meetings and was like, hello, yes, of course. I knew all the corporate lingo. I smiled and I said all of the right things. And that was like December of 2005. We started working together at the Ram downtown. And and so
Didn't have to shave for that one?
no,
Okay,
they
cool.
didn't. They didn't make me shave at all. So they
West
were
Coasters are
fine.
pretty tolerant of,
Got it.
Things had changed a little bit. Beards are way in fashion now. Practically everyone in the room has.
Yeah,
a
it's
beard.
almost a requirement. to
Dave's
have one.
counterculture.
I am counterculture in brewing.
Got it.
Clean shaven.
It was honestly, it was like a week or so in at the end of our first or second week working together at the Ram. We were having a beer and started a conversation that was, what would you do if you could open your own brewery? And I'd love to say that was it, but that led to basically what was a 3-year conversation. And
So it's kind of odd because that 3-year conversation, just those simple things like, what was your best job? What was the worst job that you had? What would you do? All of these things. We weren't planning on setting out a game plan for a brewery. We were just having some casual conversation. But as the craft beer movement, started to happen more so in Indiana and Indianapolis in particular, people started coming at us with all of these fun ideas to go work for them and open up a brewery for them.
Yeah. So yeah, we had been talking, and it was more of like, what drives you crazy? And I was full of a lot of corporate ire and angst and other things, and we just would talk about shit, bitch about things that, working for a company out of Washington that would send down mandates that are like, you need to do this or make this style of beer. Like, nobody wants to drink that here. Or like in Washington, they had like late night things where like the bar would be busy and they'd have like club night, and like, well, that doesn't work in Indianapolis, but you're forcing our entire establishment to play dance music and be open until 2 a.m. when there's no one here for it. So just like all this is kind of silly. So we both got approached by people who had money and thought that breweries were cool and would want to open a brewery. But what we realized through those conversations was that the people with money didn't know anything about opening a brewery, and that we knew exactly how to open a brewery, so they couldn't do it without us. But none of them were like, oh yeah, we'll give you equity or anything. They're just like, hey, I want to do this thing. I'll put in some money, you be the brewer. And we realized that 5 years from now we'd be in the same position doing something that we love, potentially for somebody that we maybe didn't get along with or see eye to eye. And that's when it was like, well, we see eye to eye. This is probably about 2 years into the conversation. It's like, well, we see eye to eye. We get along really well. We've known each other for a really long time, and we're good friends, and we work well together. Like, we know how to operate a brewery. Why wouldn't we come up with our plan? Wait a second, we've been coming up with our plan. Why wouldn't we come up with our plan?
Right.
And then find somebody with money? And it's like, oh, yeah, there we go. So we kind of flipped what people were coming at us with and decided to do our own thing, which originally, because we had come up in brew pubs, and honestly, in the late 90s and early 2000s, the only thing Indiana had were brew pubs. There were probably 17, 18, maybe 20 breweries in the state. Every single one of them was a brew pub. There's some people who packaged and distributed beer in bottles or kegs, but everybody had a brew pub. And so we were kind of planning that. We had a chef friend and a restaurant operations friend that we were working through menus, and we were going to do seasonal beer with seasonal food. And we spent a full year meeting every Sunday for like 3 hours, and we would talk about spaces. We were looking in Fountain Square and Mass Ave and Broad Ripple and Carmel, and like Fountain Square hadn't come along, and Mass Ave was already priced out, and same with Broad Ripple, and Carmel wasn't what it is today, but still was pretty pricey, and like nothing was working. And to open a restaurant cost a lot of money, and open a brewery cost a lot of money. So it was like banging our heads against a wall.
And then one day, Clay says,
what if we just make beer? We'd come out of one of our meetings, we had some menu tastings, we were just getting nowhere. We couldn't even figure out a corporate structure, and the four of us we got along great, but we just couldn't get it together. And I was like, what if we just make beer? And Dave's like, do you think that would work? And I'm like, man, I'd traveled a lot, and like there's all like, look at all these different cities and think about this brewery, and like there's these things happening in other cities, and there's breweries that are just breweries, and they sell beer to the people of their city, like and then it's like, look around Indianapolis, there's not no one's doing that.
Yeah.
So I went home. I'm famously bad with math. Sometimes I'm really good. Other times I'm really bad. But I was doing all the Excel spreadsheets for the company at the time. I'm also really bad at that too. But I worked through it all. But I was doing spreadsheets and just simple stuff to run numbers. And I went home and I pulled out all of the servers and all the kitchen staff. And from working in restaurants, we'd had some spreadsheets that you're like, okay, let's adapt these couple of things and work out some costs. And I took out all of the restaurant related costs and basically left in 2 guys who knew how to make beer and loved to do what they do, put together a brewery. Tap rooms had recently become legal in Indiana. Like you could actually have a brewery and have a tap room and have people in for samples and sell direct to them. That was illegal for a long period of time, but that had recently been something that's like, okay, that can happen. And it's like, okay, look at all this. And I went back and I'm like, okay, you take out all this, the numbers are completely different, but like we can make this work. And so that was kind of the thing that's like, okay. At that point, it was like the brakes broke off the train and it was headed downhill real fast, straight to hell. You're like, okay, there's no stopping this motherfucker. So we had all these ideas, and at that point, we're like, okay, now we start really planning and talking, and we were working together at the Ram. We had to work, our salaries were based on 50 hours a week, and then once a month we had a walkthrough from a regional manager who would come in and make sure that all of our copper was perfectly polished and like every single inch of the place was clean, which is great because cleaning is very important in brewing. Copper polishing, not very important in brewing. Yes, life in general. It's a good, cleanliness is a good thing, but we'd have to shut the brewery down for like 2 days at a time and polish every inch of copper once a month from top to bottom. And that would be really frustrating, which to this day we don't have any copper in any of our breweries. We do have in our distillery, we have copper, but we don't polish it. Don't polish
Hell
it.
no.
Yeah,
Really
so anyone listening
Tina.
wants to start a brewery, you're going to polish some big pieces.
Yeah, well, I mean, some people do, some people don't. I worked at Rock Bottom and had copper on my tanks for years, and Rock Bottom didn't make you polish copper. It just patinaed. Metal looks good when it's like that. Stainless steel shines up nice, but copper's a bitch. Okay. Anyway, so we'd be polishing that stuff, and you're just kind of like, oh, man. And so we were grinding through all of these ideas, but we were working day to day, and we couldn't make beers that we were going to make for ourselves because we had people are always like, oh, did you like come up with your recipes while working for the Ram? Like, no, because we had a contract that said anything we made, we would actually have to, that would become property of the Ram.
Right.
Like, what, really? So that the last year of working together was the best, most fun because we would lose our names and our recipes if we made beers for them. So whenever we came up with something, we had to come up with an idea that was good enough to like pass through the corporate structure and be a decent idea, and a name that was good enough to not seem like we weren't trying, but wasn't good enough to be something that we would want to take with us.
Yeah, totally. If we came up with a good name, we'd be like, nope, pocket.
Put in the bank. Yep, love it. Yeah.
What's just below this? What's off-brand?
Yeah. Kroger brand.
Right. We're gonna take it down a notch. So, so once we kind of decided that we were gonna do the brewery aspect, my then girlfriend, now wife, who I worked with at the Ram, who actually thought I was a drunken jackass, but thanks to Dave Colt, he talked her into realizing that I had finer qualities in life and I was a worthwhile individual. So world's best wingman right over here, and so
Goose lives on.
Yeah,
Goose does live on.
So Staria was graduating from grad school in public health, and she was from Alaska, and she wanted to go home for the summer, and we were on our way to a concert in Cincinnati, and she was like, you know what, I really want to go home for the summer and like work on fishing boats and be with my family. My brother and sister are going to be there and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. And I'm like, but I'm working on this brewery idea. Like, I don't know. And then we just kind of talked, and I was like, okay, what if I quit my job and go to Alaska with you for the summer and then come home, and like my full-time thing is to make this brewery work. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, we figure out what else we do with our life. And so it's like, okay, let's do that. So that became the plan. So, I told Dave, and he's like, what? But we're working on this thing. I'm like, I know, but I'm never going to write this fucking business plan if we're stuck in here 50 hours a week. I'm tired. I'm angry.
Yeah.
I really got it. I mean, he knows me well enough to know that every once in a while I just got to fucking get away. Like I'm a go to the wilderness and be around nobody kind of person.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Got to recharge
I
batteries.
need some pilgrimages. So anyway, I went. Dave actually stayed behind. We couldn't tell anyone we were opening a brewery. I didn't want to tell anyone we were opening a brewery until it was a reality, because I'd known enough people in life who were like, hey, I'm going to do this thing. And like, a year later, like, how's that thing? They're like, still working on it.
When people ruin your shit too, they get their opinions and then they plant seeds in your mind, and it's like, you know, we're always working on something, and you don't give away everything because people ruin shit.
Yeah, no, they really do. So I mean, we had our idea. We knew we were solid. We found a guy actually to replace me that had been brewing down the street at Rock Bottom, who was a good friend, and actually who was good enough that we knew that if Dave worked with him for the next year, that he could replace him. So like, we were conscientious employees of like, okay, well, let's find ways to replace ourselves so we don't leave our employer in a lurch. So let's work on this secret plan over here. And so then I went to Alaska for a few months, helped my parents or my in-laws remodel their house, came back, and when I came back, I didn't tell anyone I was home, and I basically stayed at home. I locked myself in the house. I wore pajamas, and like all day my wife would be like, oh wow, you're still in your pajamas. I'm like, yeah, but I'm working on this spreadsheet and I'm doing these things and I'm writing the business plan, and on Thursdays I'd go visit Dave and have some beers and talk about where we were at with various things. And so wrote the business plan and tried to put down the ideas that we had onto paper and refine the budgets. At that point in time, I pulled out my dad, who was 70 at the time, who was an entrepreneur, had probably in his lifetime has started over 100 businesses. Out of them, maybe 10 of them were successful, 2 or 3 of them were really successful, and a lot of them failed. You learn a lot from failure, it turns out. Yeah, you do. A lot of people I think it's a societal issue because everybody's so afraid to fail or doesn't want to do things, and people get so upset when they fail. But if you actually, you know, I wrote 6 business plans before I wrote the Sun King business plan, and none of them ever made it anywhere. And I would show them to people who were mentors, and they'd kick the shit out of them. And I would leave the meetings feeling really disgruntled. But by the time I got to the Sun King business plan, I mean, the business plan that we put together was bare bones, brass tacks, 2 guys, love a thing, we're going to do this thing. It wasn't like I used to write business plans. You come up with great ideas and you're like, oh my God, and then we're going to do this, and it's all blue sky. And so we really just pulled all of that stuff back. So I was having my dad just look over the business plans and give us notes and kind of work on that. But the summer before all of this was happening, they were traveling in Washington and Oregon because my parents had retired and were traveling in a motorhome. And my dad had called me and be like, oh my God, I'm in Washington and you'd never believe this place, or I'm in Oregon and I'm at Rogue and this is amazing. So he saw what craft beer could be, and it wasn't happening here. And Dave and I knew enough to know that we knew a lot about beer but didn't know shit about business. So
very true statement. Yeah. So he was, Clay's father, Omar, is an excellent mentor on that front. Gave us a crash course in being an entrepreneur. We were great at the nuts and bolts of production and, streamlining that, quasi-engineering on that front. So that was absolutely fantastic. So now, okay, great. We've got a president kind of on board to shepherd this along. So now we're ready to shop this plan. And so the Circle V place that I worked at, a friend of mine named Andy owned his own engineering business, and smart guy. He sold that off to his biggest company or customer, and also oddly won the lottery sometime in that point. But that was back when the Hoosier Lottery was like, hey, you won $1 million versus
like 360,
the Mega Ball, whatever power Mega Ball stuff. So I said, hey, you guys should probably take this business idea and let's pitch Andy. He's gotten a lot of these things, and he's going to poke all the holes in it that we need to, so we can really just kind of fine tune this for the next pitch, for getting it ready for whomever is going to be in the game on that front.
Yeah, so we thought that finding the money would be difficult. I finished the business plan maybe in October of 2008, and on this one weekend, Dave went off to the Great American Beer Festival, courtesy of the Ram, because the prior year he'd won a medal at the GABF for a Doppelbock that he'd aged in a bourbon barrel. Yep. And so he got a free trip to the GABF, which is, if you're not familiar with it out there, the Great American Beer Festival is the country's largest beer festival. It's the most prominent festival. Thousands of breweries enter thousands of beers, and they get peer judged blindly. So cool. And it's like whoever makes the best of the best. So winning a medal there is kind of like it's the pinnacle of most people's career.
It's the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay, right on.
So Dave went out for that, and Omar and I went to a meeting with Andy at the Ram on the north side, because Andy had kind of stayed in touch with Dave, and with Dave brewing there, he would come in for tappings, and I'd bet him a few times, and we just kind of shared the idea that we were working on with him a little bit. And so we sat down to go over this whole business plan with him and just talk through it. And his wife, Anna, joined us, and we were going over all this and talking. And he asked a lot of good questions at the time. There was a hop shortage going on due to a fire at a warehouse in Yakima and some other issues with weather and crops. And so he's like, well, listen to NPR, there's a hop shortage. What do you got for that? And the year that I'd been gone, or the time that I'd been gone to write the business plan, and Dave had stayed behind, he'd worked with our providers to actually, we had some friends in the industry, and it's like, hey, we're doing this secret thing. Like, we need to have hop contracts. We need to have access to raw materials and all these things. So he'd lined up hop contracts. And it's like, well, I'm glad you asked about the worldwide global hop shortage, because if you'll turn to, the back of the right side of your folder, you'll see hop contracts for the next 5 years from Brewer Supply Group. And it's like, whoa, man, you guys are really on your shit. And so asked a lot of different questions. And, he was kind of like, okay, it's like, so you're going to do this, like, you guys don't know shit about business. Like, what's your involvement, Omar? And my dad's like, yeah, if they're going to do it, like, I'm in for at least the first 5 years. I'm going to leave my motor home and park my motor home and come back to India. And, I'm in. I want to make these guys successful. I'm going to be a mentor. I'm going to be involved. And, we were talking, and Andy's like, all right, we're in. It's like, okay, you're in?
That's awesome.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. You're in. Okay, super cool. So you're just kind of like, all right, that's fantastic. And like, you're in. All right, you're in. Great. Okay. So we kind of wrapped up and got out to the car, and I looked at my dad and I was like, did we just get funded? And he goes, I don't know. I think so, but I really didn't want to press too hard. That meeting went really, really well. He's like, I'll call Andy tomorrow and we'll catch back up on some things, and I'll see like what level he's in.
Yeah.
I know we've at least got an investor. I'm like, okay, well, look, we'll take the win and leave. So Dave's out in Colorado. He calls the next day because lo and behold, at the Great American Beer Festival, we won
2 medals, a gold and a silver in the same category.
That's awesome.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
We only got to send 2 beers in, so.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, so Omar got to call to check in on Andy and say, hey, have you heard from Dave? Oh, yeah, by the way, he was out at the Great American Beer Festival, and 2 of the beers that Clay and Dave brewed for the Ram won gold and silver in the barrel-aged beer category. So how much are you in for again?
Right. Yeah.
So, and Andy's like, no, actually, like we're 100% in. That's great fucking news. Like, that's really exciting.
Oh, that's 100% sweet.
And he's like, I've got some family and friends, and he went to Rose-Hulman. He's an engineer. Got some engineering buddies. Like, I'd like to spread the risk among an investment group, but we were raising $500,000. So it's like, that's what we basically started at Sun King with $508,000. And
that's awesome.
And it was like, okay, well, great. So all of a sudden we were funded with like 1 lunch meeting, and then we're like, oh shit, like this is
really,
real, really real. So
right.
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
When you're shopping for funds like that, and I know you've known Andy, but how did you guys approach those conversations, relationships, to make sure the money didn't change the culture you guys were chasing? Because you guys had poor experiences elsewhere.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that doesn't affect what you're...
That was actually a large part of why I pulled my dad into it, was to protect our collective asses.
Okay.
So at this point, Dave Colt, I mean, he's my brother in many ways, but he's pretty much been adopted by my dad. I think my dad actually calls Dave slightly more than he calls me for business stuff these days, because I've been trying to, as my dad retired, reestablish a more father-son, and although business is always a little bit a part of it. But I wanted my dad involved because honestly, I mean, Dave and I both know, I would say, dozens of people who were in our situation who helped someone open a brewery, and they were lucky to get 5% as far as equity goes. And so bringing my dad along was very much a move of like, all right, so Andy's group was the major investor. Omar put in some actual money, but he also got sweat equity. We got sweat equity, and it was really a thing where it's like, okay, so he helped devise the overall structure. So the initial, we have one other partner, Steve, who's an attorney who loved our beers and would come get kegs filled once a month. And so actually he was the first guy we pulled in because we're like, we're going to start a business. We need an attorney. Steve's an attorney.
He's a business attorney.
He's a business attorney. Business
and loves your beer.
Legal.
Yeah. So we pulled Steve back one day, and we're like, hey, we're going to start a brewery. Would you maybe be our attorney? We'll give you a couple points of equity, and you can maybe do our legal work, make sure our contracts look good, and be a part of a brewing team. And he's like, and I get to own a brewery, and there's probably free beer involved. Like, absolutely. Okay, great. And so Steve's our partner.
Had me a beer.
But so basically, Omar kind of devised this structure, and there was a lot of back and forth because Andy's a very nice guy and he's a good man of the people, but he was also putting up most of the money and had this like, well, we're putting up most of the money, so how does this power structure lay out? And Omar devised this power structure essentially where Omar and Andy's investment group were roughly equal but owned slightly less than 50%. Dave and I were exactly equal and each owned like 23.5%. So the money nor the like intellectual property and the like idea prowess, and Omar was like, look, without these guys we don't have a business, and you know they deserve to have a serious chunk of this because without them we've got nothing. I appreciate that you have the money, but
yeah, so the money guys would need one of us to vote in something, and vice versa. We'd have to have one of the money guys so that we could
Yep.
you know.
Basically, I mean, it was a really perfect
balance.
Division of going in. I mean, going into business with somebody is tough. You got to grind through a lot of things. I mean, we're practically married at this point in time. Actually, I mean, we have contracts and all of these other various things. So, but businesses can get tense. So it was basically designed so there were 4 of us who owned and operated Sun King, and it needed 3 of the 4 of us to make any like major decision around it. And I can tell you that every single one of us lost at something somewhere along the way, but we would grind through it to a consensus. And very rarely, like, we never actually even called votes on anything because we just get to a point. And like sometimes there'd be something that Dave or myself didn't think was a great idea, and so you would have to work through it till we got to a point that worked. And so it made for a really nice kind of balance. And I think the other great thing is, and that's one of the reasons that neither one of us wanted to start a brewery with somebody that we hardly knew that had money, is that we'd known each other for a long time. He and Andy had known each other for a long time. My dad and I had known each other my whole life. And so there was kind of this really easy familial, like, trust level amongst us, and like Andy's closeness with Dave and vice versa all around left us in this position where nobody's trying to fuck anybody, and we're all really just trying to do the best thing for the business. So I think we're really fortunate in that respect. So,
and I know Tim and I have kind of had our own way of handling being in business with a friend. So you all really knew each other very well. How did you separate business, friendship? I know you had to have 3 out of 4 to do things, but how did you make sure, like, hey, like, we're friends first, how do we not fuck that up by now doing business? Or was that never really a concern?
I mean, you do hear about all of these horror stories of friendships, marriages, all kinds of things breaking up, dissolving. All the folks that started Circle V, none of them are really friends with each other, and none of the couples are still married, so it can go sideways in a pretty big hurry. I don't know. I think the fact that we're all grinders and we don't give up, and work hardworking, ethical people, that it just kind of works out. So
cool.
Yeah, I don't know, and there have definitely been points in time. I mean, I can think back to a few years ago. There was a period of time, like, as we grew, like, we'd spend less time together. And I remember having a conversation with Dave, like, we hadn't been hanging out as much because we were just going in different directions with various different things. And I remember a conversation several years ago. It's like our friendship is kind of fallen by the wayside because it's all just fucking business. And then we also it's like, okay, cool, we need to make time to do things. And we'd go to conferences and other things, but whether it's just like having beers after work and then making sure to ditch from everybody else and go have dinner and talk about other things. And
I would roll forward to the pandemic giveth and it taketh away, but what it did give when you're kind of siloed in that way is the opportunity for us to we're not going to not concerts, we're not going to concerts, but not going to conferences either. And so we would go, all right, cool, let's just go have a walking meeting, get some steps in, some fresh air, clear, get away from the doom and gloom of what's going on, and talk about what our future is, and sort of get back to what we did to get us started.
And you intermix a little bit of life. Obviously, life's changed a lot. Dave's got kids. I've got a kid. People grow and all of these things. So, understanding other people's life situations and sharing elements of that as friends, and then understanding the heavy kind of entwine that we are for a lot of our period at Sun King. Like, Dave runs liquids. I'm a professional brewer by trade, but years ago I gave up brewing, and I have a degree in rhetoric, and I was really interested in marketing and PR, and so I ran forward with that. And Omar did business, and Andy's an engineer. And honestly, for the first probably 5 to 7 years, we were all kind of in silos, just running forward. And we would have these brief meetings where we'd talk about these different things. And then my dad retired maybe 5 years ago, and that put us in a different position to start running the company. And then again, eventually we just stepped up to CEO it together, and so we started working closer together at that point. But then when March 14th or whatever of 2020 hit, like every day past that, like every day in 2020, we were in there every day, grinding it out, doing the things that we needed to do, figuring out the different pivots. We're in a highly regulated industry. You know, can people come in? Can't they come in? What do we have to do? How do we keep our staff safe? How do we do this? How do we deal with all this? So it was just so many different problems. And so like problemtunities, because problems
like
lead to opportunity.
Yeah, I like that.
But yeah, so we started really grinding through that, and like Dave said, we take walks and we do stuff, and I mean, it's just like hours and hours of it, like of constant conversation. And so while it was a really tough year, I think it also brought us back together. And it's one of those things, like when you're fighting to save your company's life, you're like, okay, man, we're in this. What do we got to do? How do we do this? What do we think? How do we think? And I mean, Dave was the first one to, like 6 months ago or whenever, some point in time after being in that for so long, to like help try to pull my head out of my ass and be like, just like, hey, okay, like things are changing. This is gonna end or transition into whatever the next phase is, and we got to get out of this like fight or flight mode and start getting back to like the creative people that we are, and how do we express ourselves, and how do we move forward, and how do we do all these things.
Yeah, during any great recession or anything, there is opportunity in that, especially coming out of it. And so I wanted to make sure that we both had our heads screwed on straight to be able to capitalize on any opportunities that were out there coming our way.
Yeah. What is something that you guys saw as an opportunity from last year moving forward? You know, what did you kind of step on?
Well, we got a lot leaner and more purposeful about how we were doing things, streamlining some stuff along the way. We knew that there were going to be, we've got God, it's so close to being able to announce, but we can't really.
We got some new things on the horizon.
If we're like 1 or 2 weeks out, we can say it, because then we'll wait to release. But yeah, we're not going to put you in a bad spot.
I don't know.
Yeah, so close. So
close.
Yeah, so there are some great opportunities that we grabbed a hold of. Strategic partnerships, doubling down with local on that front as well. And we did have one cool, fun thing with Park 100 out of Kokomo.
Yeah, no, Tipton.
Tipton, yes.
But yeah, it's a local food producer, but they make cheeses and sauces and soups for corporate restaurant groups across the country. So we'd been working on a project that actually hit in 2020 and saved our ass. And we were unable to talk about it because of an NDA until the folks decided, like, hey, it's pretty cool that Sun King makes the beer for the cheese that we're doing.
Oh, very awesome.
We ended up landing a contract to provide beer for a beer cheese on a Wendy's
burgers.
Oh wow,
that is awesome.
Pretzel pub bacon cheeseburger that they launched it was supposed to go early 2020 and ended up launching in the fall. But it takes a lot of beer to make beer cheese for nationwide fast food chains. So so that was actually a fun one that you're in the middle of this pandemic grinding to try to figure it out, because with bars and restaurants closed, 45% of all the beer that we send out the door goes to bars and restaurants. So in one fell swoop, we lost 45% of our sales. Jeez. And then our tap rooms.
Plus our
tap rooms are another 10% of our sales and a big percentage of our revenue. So overnight, we lost 50% of our revenue. And so, you're just sitting in that space where you're like, holy shit. I remember losing sleep and talking to my wife. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, we have worked so hard over the last decade of our lives to get this whole thing done. And we started talking about Sun King and creating Sun King in 2005. So for 15 years, we've been grinding on this thing, and overnight we lost half our revenue, and it may not be a thing that is anymore.
Yeah. Right. But, one of our motto is, losing or no is not an option. So what do we have to do, and how do we pivot? And what are the next steps?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we did that. I mean, one of the cool things that came out of it, again, doubling down on the local, the folks at West Fork Whiskey became really good friends kind of leading into that. And we have a distillery at our location in Carmel, but we designed it to be the opposite of actual Sun King Brewery. So like we started our brewery as a small brewery, and we really wanted to make and distribute beer in and around Indianapolis. We hit it at the right time. People were really excited about our beer. We were able to grow and expand and sell beer, throughout the entire state of Indiana. And it's led to, our 5-year goal was to sell 5,000 barrels of beer in 1 year, or in 1 year, but that would be year 5. So we started in 2009. So by 2014, we wanted to sell 5,000 barrels of beer. In 2010, we sold 5,000 barrels of beer.
Wow.
And in 2011, we sold 10,000 barrels of beer.
Beautiful.
And in 2012, we sold 15,000 barrels of beer, and then like 18 and 21. And, we would do about 35,000 barrels this year, which is really big by Indiana standards, but not so big when you look at like a lot of really larger breweries out there, like your Bells and your
Hey, we're top
Sierras
200.
We're in top 100 actually, I think. So, but we've grown really rapidly and and done really well. And people have what we do resonates with people. So we're really grateful that like people like what we do. They like our beers and enjoy them. But like with the distillery, it was kind of a passion project for Dave. I don't drink spirits. I drink everything at the same rate of speed, whether it's water, coffee, beer, or liquor. So I don't allow myself around liquor because it's not good for anyone. So, but we designed the distillery with a really small footprint that fits in that building. It can really just make enough spirits to support Sun King's operations, and so we also didn't want to make vodka.
Yeah, Clay just described perfectly an alcoholist, somebody who's